Y'all heard of that Ed Gein series on Netflix? It's a hot-ass mess thanks to Ryan Murphy, the Tyler Perry for white gay twinks. Ed Gein lives with his mother and brother at their farmhouse, where he looks after their animals diligently. Sometimes he sneaks into their neighbor's house and watches as the family's daughter, Adelene, gets changed. Your boy created the Epstein list before it existed. One time Adeline notices someone watching, but she doesn't catch him in the act. After that event, Ed goes home and puts on his mother's underwear and proceeds to hang himself while he caresses his cucumber. Suddenly the door opens, and Mrs. Gein finds out that Ed has been a bad boy. She orders him to remove the underwear before she warns him about what the Bible says regarding the type of people that end up in hell. She says he shall never touch a woman, and she reminds Ed that only a mother could love him. She knows about Ed fancying a girl named Adeline, so Mrs. Gein orders Ed never to marry or spill his seed in a woman, especially Adeline, who she thinks is a Jezebel. To her, women are sin. Later that day, Ed heads to town and tries to flirt with two girls, but he sounds creepy.
You're not from Plainfield, are you?
So the girls nope the F out of there. He's fascinated by the newspaper about the Nazi camps killing 500,000 people. He focuses on the dead piling bodies. And then comes Adeline. They've been friends for some time because Adeline believes that Ed is quite like her, weird, and has a fascination with the dead. She shows him photos of dead Jews from the Nazi camps. Ed can't believe what he's seeing, but Adeline says she got them from her cousin, who got them from a reliable source. In addition to that, Adeline's cousin has also sent her a comic book about the Bee of Buchenwald, a title given to Ilse Koch, who tortured and killed Jews. Ed is hooked and can't stop himself from reading. You know for a fact that gave him a Woody. He takes the comic home and reads it all over again. The next day, while he's chopping wood, he says,
Gotcha.
His brother Henry finally comes home, but Henry returns only to say goodbye to Ed. He's leaving to be with his girl, Ginny. He doesn't want to be trapped at home with their crazy mother. Ed warns him that their mother wouldn't approve of his plan. Ginny is twice divorced, and they know what Mrs. Gein thinks about women. But Henry is determined to leave. He advises Ed to leave too because their mother is sick and she's not good for him. Ed is pissed because he feels like Henry is disrespecting their mother. When Henry turns around, Ed hits him hard in the head with a log.
Gotcha.
He means to do it as a joke until he sees blood and realizes that Henry is not moving. Ed was definitely restarted. When Ed walks out of the barn, he hallucinates Henry waving at him, alive and well. Ed genuinely believes that Henry is still alive. So when Mrs. Gein tells him she hasn't seen Henry for a week, Ed doesn't know what to make of it. Over dinner, Mrs. Gein rants about how Mr. Gein was a drunkard who gave her two sons, Henry, the evil son, and Ed, the weak one. She says she only slept with Mr. Gein twice. Well, no wonder Mr. Gein was a drunk. She reminds Ed never to disappoint her, and Ed promises he won't. Ed sheds one tear, as Mrs. Gein says only a mother could love him, but it's the truth. The next day, Ed checks the barn and finds Henry. He tries waking him up, but when he realizes Henry's dead, he takes Henry's body to the middle of the field and sets the woods on fire. Then he tells his mom that the fire got out of control. When the old woman returns with the cops, they find Henry's body lying on the snow. Mrs. Gein is inconsolable. The officer in charge can't believe Ed's story that he and Henry started the fire at dawn because Henry's body was already stiff and cold when he was found. However, since this was back in the day, the incompetent mortician concludes it had to be asphyxiation. Mrs. Gein is so heartbroken, she suffers a stroke. Ed takes care of her since, from carrying her to washing her booty hole. Ilse Koch, the Bee of Buchenwald, is a perfectionist. She wants everything flawless. She even bitch slaps one of the little girls because she's hogging the donkey. While they celebrate and party with Nazi officials and their families, they use the Jews as they please. Ilse even teaches her daughter how to shave the Jews' hair, saying they are subhuman and that they all carry lice. When the party starts, Ilse makes sure to be the star of her party. Mounting on a horse, she humiliates a Jew and chases her out as the guests cheer. This continues to fascinate Ed as he reads it in the comic book. One day, Mrs. Gein and Ed head to the Smith's farm to ask for the $10 they owe. But Daniel Smith doesn't want to pay and argues with them. Mrs. Gein is so angry, she confronts him with all she has left in her, and then she falls to the ground. After she dies, Ed is devastated. But right after the burial, Ed hears Mrs. Gein's voice talking to him as if she's still alive. And one time, he goes to his mother's dresser and puts on her underwear like a transformer. As he pleases himself, Mrs. Gein's voice tells Ed there is a way to bring her back. So Ed heads to the cemetery and digs Mrs. Gein's grave. But he can't break the casket. Just then, the voice orders him to dig the grave next to hers, whose casket is made of wood. Ed obliges and takes the corpse back to his house. He positions the body on his mother's rocking chair and undresses her. He basically invented necrophilia. Because of Ed's schizophrenia, he sometimes imagines Jews from the extermination camps trying to get into his house. Then his mother's voice brings him back to reality. Ed Gein was born in 1906, and when he went to school, his books taught him about killing Native Americans. He has developed a liking for the South Sea tales, like Shrunken Heads. Included in the comics are stories of Ilsa flaying her victims and making things out of them. She has even made a lamp using the skin of a prisoner. So Ed would copy her techniques to make his own lamp. He would get frustrated when part of the skin would rip. White people do the craziest things. Since his mother died, Ed hasn't been eating proper meals. He's only been eating canned beans in his favorite bowl made out of a human skull. In his head, he hears Mrs. Gein tell him to eat better, so Ed says he needs to get a trad wife to care for him. Mrs. Gein is against the idea and warns Ed not to bring a Jezebel into the house. But Ed finally finds his voice, saying he'll do as he pleases and will be with Adelene. During a date, Adeline expresses her desire to leave town and head to New York. She wants to be an apprentice to a crime scene photographer hiding under the alias Ouija. She plans to learn from him and later on start her own business, taking photos of murder scenes. She thinks there's something intimate about seeing dead bodies that are still warm. Adeline is glad she has Ed to talk to because he's the only one who understands her. So Ed reveals that after reading Ilsa's work, he was inspired to create his own bowl using a human skull. Crazy meets crazy. Adeline doesn't believe him, so Ed invites her home to show her. This girl has zero survival skills. Once in the house, she gets creeped out because it's dark. Once Ed lights it up, she sees how messy the house is and agrees that Ed needs a woman's touch in the house. Adeline sees a bloodied hacksaw and a creepy-looking bowl, but doesn't think too much of it. He asks to go steady so she can meet his mother, so she agrees. Upstairs, she sees a weird-looking chair with a nipple poking out, but Ed doesn't tell her exactly what it is. This would have been the perfect time to turn around, but girl is dumb. Then Ed finally introduces Adeline to Mrs. Gein, but the corpse is facing the window. Ed convinces Adeline that Mrs. Gein is still alive, though very sick. But Adeline not only notices the awful stank, but is also bothered by the creepy silence. She makes an excuse to leave the house. He asks,
Give me a kiss before you go?
then asks,
Maybe sit on my lap?
She refuses and runs to the tree, making Ed extremely angry at his mother. He is mad that Mrs. Gein disrespected Adeline, even though she knows Ed loves her. Adeline, who is still outside, hears Ed's outbursts and his confession of love. Mrs. Gein yells at him to take his rifle to kill drunkards, so Ed takes his rifle and heads to town. He heads to a bar for a drink and talks to the owner, Mary. Mary is from Germany, like Mrs. Gein. Ed reveals that he's having some girl problems, so Mary offers to introduce him to some of her lady friends. But the conversation shifts, and Mary gets offended when Ed calls her a big-back Jezebel. Then he imagines seeing Ilsa arguing with her husband, surrounded by other Nazi officers. Ed points out that Mary is nothing like his mother, because his mother is a saint. He calls her a Jezebel, then shoots her in the head. He proceeds to drag her body out of the building. The show focuses on the horror movies that were inspired by Ed Gein, specifically the actor who is going to play the killer in Psycho, but these parts are pretty disappointing, so we will fast forward it. Ryan Murphy loves adding white muscular gays in his movies. Eventually, detectives question a man at Mary's bar who says he saw Ed Gein leave the bar. They enter, and it's a bloody mess, and they see blood that was dragged outside. The man says it couldn't have been Ed because he wouldn't hurt a fly. One night, as Adeline is taking a shower, Ed Gein enters her house and stabs her multiple times. But this is just a scene from the Psycho movie. Ed's father was a drunkard, and it caused a lot of fights between him and Mrs. Gein. The old woman reached her limit and kicked Mr. Gein out. He got angry and hit Mrs. Gein across the face, but Mrs. Gein hit back harder. Then she told Ed he must never touch a woman to save her the burden of having a child. Back to the present, Ed, in women's clothes, dances to some music as he cleans, whilst wearing Mary's face as a mask. When detectives knock, he quickly covers up to meet them. He says he last saw Mary the week before and was at home all day yesterday. The detective breaks the news to him, and Ed pretends to be shocked. Believing Mrs. Gein was sick, they bid Ed goodbye. This sheriff is fine, but he dumb AF. After a few days, Ed sees Adeline, and he's surprised because he thought she didn't want him anymore. Adeline shows Ed newspaper clippings of a transsexual who went to Denmark for a sex change. Something excites Ed, and he invites Adeline out on a date. Later that night, he digs up a grave and steals a ring from a corpse, which he uses when he proposes to Adeline at a graveyard. I'm starting to think this girl enjoys his kink. She immediately says yes before throwing her vag at him. But as they're about to do the deed, Ed remembers his mother telling him not to fornicate unless he's planning to make babies. He's not yet ready to make baked cream pies, and Adeline understands that. So to help him get used to kids, she takes him to see Mrs. Heller, who's looking for a babysitter for Frank Jr. and Enid. Their babysitter, Miss Evelyn, was hospitalized due to polio because she listened to RFK Jr. and would be walking with a cane. While waiting for her, Adeline was supposed to babysit. But because she has a part-time job, she introduces Ed instead, promising he'll do great for 10 cents an hour. Ain't nobody in their right mind would let this creeper babysit. On the first night, the kids were so bored that Ed drove them to his house and played magic tricks, using bowls made out of human skulls and a finger. The kids weren't impressed, so Ed dressed up using a severed head and removed it only to reveal a mask over his face. They were scared as foo. Afterward, he takes the kids home. Mrs. Heller and her husband are furious. They tell Ed to leave. When Ed finds Miss Evelyn, he confronts her for taking what was supposed to be his job. He even follows her to the Hellers' house. Until one night, he breaks in the Hellers' house. The stupid white girl ends up following the noise and he abducts her. He removes her clothes and leaves her only in her underwear. He ties her to a chair while he thinks about what to do next. Then he says he keeps hearing voices and he just wants them to stop. He looks over at Mrs. Gein, carries her to sit across from Miss Evelyn, and then makes her hold a mallet. He puts a bucket in between them and grabs Miss Evelyn by the hair as he guides the corpse's hand to hit her with the mallet. It misses a couple of times before he successfully strikes her head. Then Ed goes over to Adeline's, saying he's ready to be a father after a successful babysitting gig. However, Adeline's mother is against the relationship, insisting that no one ever liked Mrs. Gein. But Adeline defies her mother and moves in with Ed.
You're just so darling I could eat you.
Adeline still thinks Mrs. Gein is alive and only chooses to stay upstairs. Y'all, this show is a hot mess. Quite a few inaccuracies, apparently. But that's Ryan Murphy for you. These were just the first 3 episodes. Should we cover the rest?
If you like this video, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We got lots more of foolishness on this channel that'll have you hollering. And if you like to watch more, just click here or here.